Thanks for joining us. This is, we'll call it episode 2 of our Education in the Balance series. Today, we're going to be focusing on the tension that we're seeing called contested power. So joining me today is a new teammate of ours, a relatively new teammate of ours. It's my honor to introduce you all to Gregory Seaton. He's the Senior Director of Impact and Improvement. Greg, you want to tell folks a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, and thank you, Jason and Sean, and good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for taking time to join us. I'm Greg Seaton, the Senior Director of Impact and Improvement at KnowledgeWorks, and prior to KnowledgeWorks was at Jobs for the Future, helping build equitable pathways. And a little before that was a professor at the College of New Jersey for about 15 years. And really interested in how boys, in particular males of color, navigated both neighborhood and school. And so looking for ways to support young people as they, one, addressed school systems, but also addressed what was happening in neighborhood. And the whole idea was to support youth in, one, recognizing their own stressors, and two, how they responded to them in long-term adaptive ways.
Awesome. So welcome, Gregory. Thank you for joining us today. So for those of you who may not have joined us for the previous episode, my name is Jason Swanson. I'm your host. I'll be here for the duration. I serve as the Director of Strategic Foresight here at KnowledgeWorks. And to just provide a little bit of level setting, kind of how we ended up here in this conversation, it was about a year ago. The Strategic Foresight team held just a reflection. It was a conversation on what COVID could mean for the future of learning. And we were really fortunate to have people join us from far and wide. So we had an international audience to really discuss this idea of this massive disruption and what it might mean for the future. So there was a really, really robust conversation that took place, both online and in the chat. And coming out of that, we recognized that we had some work to do. So the team and I sat down and we started to think about really COVID, the disruption, and more specifically, those sort of under the hood tensions that were bubbling up beyond just the questions on how we serve learners, right? So how can we continue with education continuity, things like device access, but really what else might be happening, big issues that could steer futures for learning. And we created a publication, or really some content that we called Education in the Balance. And these were a set of future tensions or future issues that allowed us to really look at what we would think of as at least near-term critical uncertainties, to then start to make certain assumptions about directionality and their relation to a wide range of futures and outcomes associated with learning. So those included leadership focus, and this is this idea or this tension around, will system leaders bring people together to really imagine drastically different futures, or might we really experience some system snapback? And will we kind of fall prey to the exhaustion that we're all feeling and kind of be pushed to really a return to normal and to how things used to be? We looked at this idea of strain systems, and this idea that education systems' capacity to address the complex problems that it faces is really limited. And even though we're looking at a really big infusion of resources right now, that idea is that it's probably likely a one-time infusion. So might we see new approaches and funding that can address these really massive looming challenges? Or, might we see systems continue to rely on really inadequate approaches and structures to meet these challenges? And then last but not least, the framing of our conversation today, and this is one of the reasons I'm so excited to talk to Greg, is this idea of contested power, and that some of my colleagues have suggested we might call this unyielding power. And that throughout the past year, we've seen communities of color finding new avenues of power and influence in the education sphere for a wide variety of reasons. So when we look at this trajectory of change, I think we need to ask ourselves, right? Will community activism really have a lasting impact? Or will established power structures prevail? Another way to look at this is, might this be cyclical, where we have an event and we have rightful movement and outrage around that event, and then we kind of have this return to normal after there's a little bit of action. So with that, we're going to dive right in. I'm going to stop sharing my screen. And my question to you, Greg, is, in this moment in time, as we think about that tension and through the work that you do and have done, what are the ways that you've seen this tension maybe start to play out on the ground and the learning communities that you serve and with the stakeholders that you talk to?
It's interesting in that I just want to acknowledge the verdict yesterday, and also acknowledge how that has both informed and helped frame some of the responses today, at least from my vantage point. And the George Floyd case, in many ways, sparked an opportunity, particularly last year, for a lot of educators, intermediary organizations, and even philanthropy to think about equity, racism, systemic structures in very think about old issues with new lenses. I think it was just so stark and undeniable that it forced us to recognize the humanity of others in ways that we really haven't historically since the civil rights movement. And I've been thinking about the cyclical nature of this and wondering how we help those that are institutional leaders and those on the front line, one, navigate what it means to be equitable and just. I think that will mean different things in different spaces. And then two, how that shows up. I know for a lot of last year, because of the dual pandemic of sort of COVID and racial justice, COVID revealed what was always there. It just made it more extreme. And I think we are now at an inflection point to either make a decision. And the decision is, do we leverage the collective identity or this whole notion of collectivism that the dual pandemics expose? For example, the science of wearing a mask. The mask is not for you, the individual, necessarily. It's to protect others. The coming together around social activism. There were people that did not necessarily look like George Floyd front and center. The lesson is to leverage our interconnectedness, particularly as we foreground equity and understanding how the liberation of others is tied into your liberation. And that's more than sort of a philosophical ideal. As the numbers or demographics shift in the US, equity is not just a thing for people of color. I think those white folks are going to have to also begin to think about equity and power sharing differently. Um, and there is a vested interest beyond altruism for equity to prevail.
Absolutely. Right. So in a perfect world, there is just the moral argument, right? Full stop. We don't need to carry this any further. But to your point, right? The problems that we have on the horizon, in fact, I would even say that the current challenges we face now, they're challenges that face no border, they're global in nature, that are going to require us to unlock everybody's talent and good thinking, uh, to really meet head on to create a more livable future for everyone, including the entrenched power structures that be now, right? It is in our interest and our to bet big on our collective future by harnessing our collective wisdom, right? And we cannot do that with the current structures we have at play, right? And so I'm tracking with you 100%.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, sorry.
Go ahead.
Yeah, and I would just add to that point, and I think one of the questions is more tends to lead to the how to engage in power sharing with communities of color.
Mm-hmm.
And I think part of that is recognizing that many of these communities have so much to share and so much value that the communities can do the work for you in terms of those that are in educational leadership.
Mm-hmm.
And the degree to which we are comfortable sharing those spaces will govern the degree to which we are successful.
Absolutely. When we think of, or when I reflect on a lot of the research we've done over the past year around sort of the innovations and changes that have sprung up really across the learning landscape, one of the things that one of the sources of concern I have when thinking through both an equity lens and this idea of contested or unyielding power is that a lot of the innovation has happened in a very narrow band, right? And I'm not looking to put it down or to denigrate it or to minimize it, because it was an amazing lift, right? But that narrow band was around the how, right? You know, how are we going to continue to educate kids within the paradigm of the existing system, right? Zoom, broadband, all necessary ingredients, right? But certainly George Floyd and sort of kind of what we would think of degree of strategic fit with those innovations should and will push us then to ask about the what and the why, right? And I think that we need to move that conversation, you know, even from an equity standpoint, not just how do we think about different ways of resourcing and different areas of opportunity, but what am I teaching and why am I teaching it, right? At its very core. And I think having those conversations really will be transformative. I think when we think about the nature of contested power and having a lot of new voices and new awareness of how, you know, in and of how the system works, should push those questions right to the fore, right? So now that we've kind of shored up our bases and we have, you know, more kids than ever, you know, having access to the internet, that now we can start to talk about the real meat of the issue and get into systems change and not systems tweaks, right? And you know, I'm sensing that perhaps you're also seeing the same thing, and so I'm curious to know your thinking around
that. In preparation for this, was really in a place of hopelessness around the cyclical nature that I think you so eloquently framed earlier around sort of event, movement, status quo, event, movement, and not knowing how the verdict would go yesterday uh, was just an incredible weight. And it took a while to shed that. And part of framing for the future or thinking about where the possibilities lie uh, to create systems that allow young people to actualize their full selves, I just went to history for inspiration.
Mhm.
And was thinking about uh, Dewey and uh, the Hull House, Jane Addams, and so early 1900s, where this notion of letting youth interest guide their educational journey, but also human development.
Mhm.
And Dewey's premise that in the absence of deeply experiential education, that youth never actualize the muscle to become sort of lifelong learners, but also that in the absence of a educational system that promotes criticality, that democracy is not possible. And so looking to the past to reimagine a future in which uh, humans, the space, shape, and character of education, and how distance learning has allowed youth and parents to allow schools to be much more transparent, and thinking about how do we maintain some of that transparency, some of that agency, and double down on it. Um,
Mhm.
Also inspired by uh, youth leadership in the civil rights movement. How are we creating spaces for young people to make meaning of the historical moments in which they live that go beyond the periodic table or Pythagorean theorem? All important
Mhm.
things, but wow, you survived a pandemic. How are we making meaning of that? That's so important in that for many of these marginalized communities. Uh, and so how do we make meaning of what it took to survive?
Mm. So I want to be attentive of time. We've got about 9 minutes left. I think it might be a good time to transition over to questions if that sounds good. Um, so Sean, you'll have to
Sounds
refresh my
great.
memory. I know that we had somebody email a question in, and I'm grappling as to just what that question is, but I want to be sure we get to that and any others that might be bubbling
Yeah, let me dig that up. Do you want to answer Rita's in the meantime? It should
around.
take me a
Sure.
minute.
All right. So from Rita, I'm really appreciating the history and thoughtfulness in this conversation. And Greg, this is a question for you. And she asks, can you say more? Can you say more what you mean by transparency? It's a word used often, but I'm wondering if you're talking about the kind that means showcasing our vulnerability to one another, or is that what transparency should be?
Um, Rita, I think the answer that I would like to give is that I think both. Transparency in the sense of I think we have to free leaders and people that are in this space grappling with these issues of the notion that they have to be perfect. Because at an individual level and at an organizational level, we're both being and becoming, and acknowledging the fact that as part of that cyclical process that we will make mistakes, and acknowledge that we don't have to show up perfectly. I think we then open up our own understanding, and it invites other folks in, and it allows us to honor different types of knowledge in being in ways that I don't think we traditionally do. If principals didn't think that they had to know everything and do everything, if superintendents didn't think that everything was lost, everything was up to them to make happen, this notion of transparency is freeing, and it moves us more to a collective mindset where I think we could get much further.
So we have an additional question that came in. So Leah, hey Leah, glad you could join us. And Leah asks, as we think about learning loss, accelerated learning, and opportunities to learn, and discuss pros and cons of testing, how do we seriously consider what students have learned during this time?
Yeah, Rita, what I would love to see us giving students structured assignments and let them answer the question. And how, whether it's mixed media or how have you changed over the last year? What has been meaningful to you? And leaving it very open-ended and giving students the freedom to talk about and make meaning of that experience, I think would be so powerful and fascinating. While at the College of New Jersey, I was teaching a pre-service course to largely middle-class white female students from Jersey. That should come as no surprise given sort of what we know about teaching demographics. But a lot of these students would go into urban districts, and the way that the program was set up was that they would not have a opportunity to work with students from urban districts until their junior or senior year. Too late. The long and short of it is that working with a group of middle schoolers, the middle schoolers came to the college and taught the class. And so it was an opportunity for middle schoolers to say, wow, all of these college students are paying money to hear me talk about adolescent learning and development. And it was powerful for both populations in that it allowed students to see, it allowed my pre-service teachers to see the power, the brilliancy, creativity of this. Also allow middle schoolers to see their own power, value in terms of education and learning.
The question that I am the most curious about from youth perspective isn't not only just what have you learned the last year, what have you learned about adults, right? That's, when we think about developing that criticality, right, and creating sort of these liberatory and emancipatory spaces, right? Just like, tell us how you're seeing this, right? We need to know that as much as, as that's a powerful frame in thinking about change and what we want. All right, so our last question here. What's the single most important thing teacher preparation can do differently to be part of this important shift in movement?
I think lead pre-service teachers through identity shifting and imagination building experiences. In many ways, we are asking teachers to create environments that they never experienced. And so how do we help decenter their own identities to bring about creativity and thinking about what those experiences may mean for other types of students. So explicitly helping pre-service teachers create spaces, create the spaces that they would as teachers.
And then with respect to time, we've got 2 minutes left. Janice asks, what role do we see for parents in this? In partnership to drive the innovations that we've talked about, maybe just in terms of tapping them for maybe different perspectives and increased visibility as to barriers of learning. But from your vantage point, what role do you see for parents and I'll say caregivers?
Yes, I am fanboying over a researcher by the name of Anne Ishimura. And she talks about co-design of educational spaces with parents and with the idea of equity at the center. And this is really about schools and editors reaching out not just for participation or to hear voice, but reaching out to parents to co-construct and co-design the educational experience, which is radical and very different than what we've done in many ways. But I don't think parents' community voice has been as proximal as it is now in a long time. So for me to think radically, as Ishimura suggests, now is the time.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
All right. And with that, we are at time. So I want to thank everybody for joining, spending 30 minutes of your day with us. Greg, Sean, thank you for your partnership in this. This was an amazing learning experience. So thank you very much. We will be doing our final episode of this series on the 19th of May. I'll be joined by Rita Pillow and Lillian Pace. So I hope you all can join us then. So thank you very much.
Thank you all.